Welcome to Remnant Stew, the podcast that proves that things can quickly balloon right out of control. I'm your host, Steve.
And I'm your host, Leah, and together with Phil, we make up the Stew crew. Say hi, Phil.
Hi, Phil.
That was good, Phil.
Today we'll be discussing BALLOONACY, when the cheerful party and parade props go bad.
If you have an appetite for intriguing and bizarre true stories, then pull up a chair and grab a spoon for a curious helping of Remnant Stew.
My wife was telling me that she was blowing up a balloon one time, one of those long ones, and I think it was for a party, and suddenly the thing popped and slapped her right in the face. It was painful, but it was kind of funny when she was telling me about it. So. They can be tricky, those balloons, can't they?
I don't know that I've ever had any balloon incidents. Knock on wood, it could always happen. But why don't you start today? Why don't you go first?
Well, okay, and speaking of my wife's from the great city of Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland gets kind of a bad rap, I've heard it called the mistake by the lake, and I never really had thought too much about Cleveland until we got married, and I visited her old hometown with her. Her sister still lives up in that area, and I really like Cleveland. I think it's a really neat, fascinating place. It's so different though from where I grew up in Texas, but kind of adding to their image was a pretty serious balloon incident that happened back in 1986, April of 1986. It was something that was supposed to be a great thing called Balloon Fest of '86, and the thing is that there's a big scheme that was actually sponsored by the United Way. It was a fundraising effort, and they filled 1.5 million helium balloons and caught them all in this huge net right over the main public square in downtown Cleveland, and then they were going to release them. It was going to be a big aha moment, when all the balloons got released. Thousands of volunteers worked a full night and a morning in a fenced-off area covered with a loose net ceiling in the central public square. Before the big ta-da, the scene had evolved to look like some kind of a writhing, oversized ball pit monster. You've seen some pictures of it. There's actually, if you go to YouTube and just type in Balloon Fest '86, the pictures look like something that's from an animated series, but actually it was real. Suddenly the weather started turning bad on them, and so they had to make a decision. Do we hold off and let the weather go by? But no, they said let her rip, open them up that, and so the balloons were released.
That is a pretty popular thing to do a balloon release. Right. Not always such a good thing, though.
No, and I think it used to be more popular than it is these days. I can remember, as a kid watching football games, and they would always do a big balloon release before. Well, anyway, for a while it was really an incredible display. There was a photographer named Tom Sheridan, and he captured the event on film, and the images are really unbelievable. And I like the article that I'm looking here. It comes from Gizmodo, I believe, and it. The writer described it as somehow equal parts genuinely heart-filling expressions of wonder, horror film urban infestation, and terrifying unidentified civic explosion. Then the asteroid field of airborne debris clouded the sky. They shut down a runway at Cleveland's Hopkins Airport. They interrupted Coast Guard's attempts to rescue a pair of fishermen. They also spooked some prize-winning horses so badly that they injured themselves. They generally made a mess of things, but just huge amounts of balloons as they came settling in the land and on Lake Erie, just outside of Cleveland. And so it was made a big mess. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but didn't work out too well.
A good idea gone bad.
Yeah, exactly.
And when I was researching, I came across a story as well, and I have a little bit more information on the two fishermen. Yeah. So the day before the balloon launch, and we have a picture of this, it's crazy. Well, not of the fishermen, but the day before the balloon launch, 2 fishermen went out to Lake Erie and failed to make it back. Their boat was found, anchored and otherwise fine on the lake, but the men were nowhere to be found. The Coast Guard speculated that the boat had maybe capsized temporarily, tossing the pair from the boat into the water. There was a 3-day search for the men, but they were not found. One of the problems with the search was that balloons had landed on the water, and
Thousands of them.
We have a picture of that, and
We'll
trying
put it
to
on our website.
find a bobbing head among all of those balloons floating on the water, it just absolutely impossible.
It looks like a park full of balloons as
That-
far as you can see.
And so one of the men's widows actually sued the United Way and others for $3.2 million. The men's bodies washed up on shore a couple of weeks later.
Yeah, kind of had a sad sad ending there for sure for those families. But didn't help Cleveland's image as the mistake by the lake. But I still love Cleveland anyway.
And speaking of balloons, especially helium balloons, when you think of helium balloons, you can't help but think of Macy's Thanksgiving Parade.
Oh, I love those big balloons, yeah.
Well, the parade started in 1924, which makes this year's parade number 96. So it's almost 100 years old. Most of the balloons, now they didn't start out with the balloons. I think the very first one was in 1927, so not too long after. The very first one was, can you guess?
Was it Mickey Mouse?
No, it was Felix the Cat.
Oh, Felix the Cat, right. Okay.
He was filled with air, not helium, so he was held up with stilts. He did get tangled in some telephone wires along the parade route and caught fire, though.
That's not a good start.
No, not a good start. And yet they persisted with the whole balloon thing.
Right.
The flames were
If at first
extinguished.
you don't succeed, I mean, why give up?
That's right.
Make
They
it
put out
better.
the flames pretty quickly, though.
Well, that's good then.
Most of Macy's parade balloons are between 5 and 6 stories high,
Oh, they're huge.
somewhere between 30 and 60 feet long, and each balloon requires about 90 handlers.
Wow.
In all, there are about 2,000 to 3,000 balloon handler volunteers per parade. These handlers must weigh at least 120 pounds and be in good health.
Okay.
A few of those volunteers designated as leaders go through training in aerodynamics, geometry, and physics. They also practice handling the balloon ahead of time in a large field. Each balloon also has a police officer that marches along the parade route with it.
Yeah, because they're walking through really tight, confined spaces, right?
That's-
through the streets of New York, right?
That's right. And in spite of all of those safety precautions, as well as it being tethered to 2 utility vehicles, each weighing 800 pounds, there's still a lot of mishaps.
Tell us about that.
Well,
Oh,
well, one really cool fact about it is when the balloons were first used, at the end they were just released and allowed to fly away.
Let it go.
Just let it go.
Let it go.
And so, can you imagine just driving down the street and all of a sudden seeing a big
Felix the
Smurf
Cat's
or-
coming at you,
Felix
yeah.
the Cat or a Smurf or something? But there was also a reward given to anyone who would find a balloon and return it. But as people are people, a lot of them would shoot the balloons down or tear the balloon apart in order to bring in a piece, hoping for the claiming of the reward.
Look, really, this really is a Pizza Felix.
That's
looks
right.
like him.
That's right. The practice came to a final end, though, when one loose balloon got caught in a plane propeller, and it almost brought it crashing down.
Yeah.
Another article, though, gave a different story to that, or a different angle to that story, that the pilot deliberately crashed into the airborne balloon thinking it would be funny, but the situation quickly turned scary. Well, and
That was the era of daredevil pilots, I think.
Well, and it was a female pilot.
Oh,
No, we're gonna not focus on that. And she she had an instructor in there with her. And so as the plane was spiraling to the ground, her instructor had to trade places with her, and she almost actually fell out of the plane during that. And he was able to guide the plane in safely. And both pilot and instructor faced serious investigation for violating several aviation rules.
I would think so. And I like the idea of hey, there's a big plane. Let's fly a big balloon. Let's fly the plane into it. It'll be funny.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Watch me.
It'll be great.
But
people will laugh.
Now the balloons are simply deflated and stored until next year. Go figure.
Good thinking. I think they've gotten smarter as time has gone along.
Now, in 1957, a Popeye the Sailor Man balloon had a hat that captured and held quite a bit of rainwater. When turning a corner too quickly, apparently, the water caused Popeye to tip forward and dumped all that freezing rainwater on the crowd below.
That's not fun. Blow me down, he could say.
Blow me down. Then in 1993, the first video game-based character, Sonic the Hedgehog, appeared.
Sonic. Yeah.
High winds caused Sonic to crash into an off-duty police officer and a young girl. Both suffered only minor injuries, but Sonic was nearly completely destroyed.
Tried to go supersonic, probably.
High winds make flying these parade balloons very dangerous. In 2005, high winds caused a 515-pound M&M balloon to crash into a streetlight, making debris fall on two sisters, seriously injuring them.
That's not good.
One sister had to receive 9 stitches in her head. Both sisters were compensated with a lifetime supply of M&Ms.
Well, that's worthwhile because, M&Ms, if you'd like to sponsor us, we'll certainly give you a plug because they're just as good as now as they were when I was 5 years old.
That's right. Stitches, but, okay, M&Ms. That wasn't the first incident with a lamppost, though. In 1997, a Cat in the Hat balloon hit a lamppost, also causing debris to fall onto spectators. 4 people were injured, putting one of them into a 24-day coma. That man sued the city for $395 million and settled for an undisclosed sum 4 years later.
Yeah, probably less than that. But
so Macy's Day, Thanksgiving Day balloons, pretty dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to pay more attention to that parade this coming year. Well, have you ever been in a hot air balloon?
I haven't. I want to, but I haven't.
I haven't either, but I have seen them, and they certainly look fascinating. I've known some people that have gone up, and they say it's just really an amazing experience. It's so quiet as you're drifting along up in the air currents, and the view is stunning. I believe out in New Mexico they have the big balloon fest every year. But kind of got me interested in some of the origins of balloon flight. In fact, the first beings to ever embark on a hot air balloon ride were not humans. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
In fact, it was a sheep, a rooster, and a duck. Now, this sounds like a great Disney movie, but...
that actually sounds like the beginning of a joke.
Yeah, a sheep, a rooster, and a duck walk into a balloon.
How did they choose that? I mean, was it all in one balloon?
It was all in the same balloon, yes. It was all in the same balloon.
And they just chose that?
I guess that's what was available.
Here, let's just stick these in here.
Now, much of the early history of ballooning takes place in France. In fact, there were 2 brothers, Joseph Michel and Jacques Montgolfier, developed a hot air balloon in Annonay, France, and they demonstrated it publicly on September 19, 1783, for King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette at Versailles. I understand they served cake for all the visitors. I don't know.
And I assume this was when she still had her head.
Yeah, she still had her head by at that time. Anyway, first they made an unmanned flight lasting 10 minutes, after which time the flight with the animals occurred. The balloon was connected to a tether, and it reached a height of about 1,500 feet, and it traveled about 2 miles before making a very soft, safe landing. You'll be happy to know that none of the animals were harmed by their unusual trip.
Okay, wait. Sheep, rooster, and a duck.
Right.
I think the sheep is kind of, the rooster and the duck, they could at least fly a little bit if something went awry.
Flap their wings a bit, yeah.
But the sheep was just, he was at the mercy of whatever happened.
Yeah, let's put the sheep in there. That's I grew up raising sheep, and they're kind of docile, but they made their trip pretty well. Now, 3 months later, the first flight with human passengers was made. Actually, it was November 21st, 1783. Now, King Louis XVI, he had originally decreed that condemned criminals would be the first test pilots. But there were 2 Frenchmen that wanted that honor for themselves, Jean-Francois Pilatre de Rosière, along with Marquis Francois de Arlendes. I'm
Now,
probably
now
messing
did you?
up those
Yeah, I
French.
was going to say, did you look up these pronunciations?
I did not. I did not. Well, anyway, these two gentlemen petitioned successfully for the honor, and they were the first manned balloon flight, and that was in 1783, November 21st, 1783, in France. About 11 years later, the French were involved in a conflict along the border with France and Belgium called the Battle of Fleurus. And somebody had the bright idea, one of the Frenchmen, why don't we use one of these nifty hot air balloons as an observation platform to spy out the battlefield and see what our enemies are doing. And so they did. That was the first time that it was in 1794 that a hot air balloon had been used in battle. Hot air balloons rides today almost always end with a glass of champagne or two. Most people might just think that's a nice way of rounding out a special event, but really that tradition also goes back to those early times in France, as more and more French noblemen took to the opportunity to take to the skies in a balloon, but often they landed in farmers' fields, and the farmers weren't too happy to have some of their crops messed up by these balloons landing. And so the nobleman always carried along some champagne with him to offer to the farmers to help soften their mood a little bit about having to put up with this balloon in their field.
That is probably the most French thing I could think of. Yes, I'm trespassing. Sorry, you're angry.
Let's have some champagne.
That's right. Oh, okay. That makes everything better.
Why not? Yes. Well, you might think that was the most French thing that you've ever thought of, but I think this next one is even more French than that. Because there was actually once a duel fought in France from balloons.
How could we make this more dangerous?
Right, for sure. When most of us think of duels, we think of white gloves and Western shootouts. But in 1808, a couple of Frenchmen, who were, of course, in love with the same woman, an opera dancer, they engaged in a very unusual duel. Feisty and with a definite flair for the dramatic, the French are legendary for using duels to settle disagreements and to defend their honor. In fact, it's said that Louis XIII, back in the 1600s, granted a whopping 8,000 pardons for murders associated with duels. You wonder there's many Frenchmen left because they were killing each other off in duels so rapidly back in the day. But in 1808, a different kind of face-off took place in the skies above Paris. It involved two Frenchmen, Monsieur de Grandpré and Monsieur de Pique. Both had been secretly seeing Mademoiselle Tirevette, a renowned dancer at the Paris Opera. It was decided that the winner of the duel would win her dainty manicured hand, or more eloquently put, Mademoiselle Tirevette would bestow her smiles on the survivor. The contest was to take place 2,000 feet in the air, with each man firing a blunderbuss at the other man's balloon. Yes, that's right. The men weren't going to aim at each other. They were trying to shoot down much larger targets, each other's balloon. Apparently, the arrogant Frenchman believed that a traditional showdown would be, well, too commonplace and unimaginative. How much more intriguing, they reasoned, to turn their testosterone-fueled battle into a mid-air dogfight. Love this. This article comes to us from something called the Vintage News. On the morning of May 3rd, 1808, in Paris's Tuileries Gardens, the two men climbed into their identical hot air balloon baskets. Each was allowed a shotgun and a co-pilot. This is where it really gets interesting, a co-pilot to help him operate the balloon, which means, incredibly, that each man's respective sidekick fully expected to die if his guy had a lousy aim.
You just have to take a moment to appreciate how much effort went into this act of stupidity.
How did you talk somebody into this? If we win, it'll be great.
This is unbelievable that somebody would go to that much trouble just to kill each other.
And take along a friend. The cords securing the balloons to the ground were cut, and the balloons ascended into the air as the crowd of curious spectators, many of whom simply thought they were watching a friendly balloon race, cheered them on. The balloons rose to half a mile off the ground and were separated by about 80 yards when the signal was given from below. The duel is officially on. De Pique got off the first shot, but inexplicably failed to hit his enormous target. It would be funny if the results weren't so tragic. Grandpré then returned fire, faring much better. He hit his mark, collapsing to Peak's balloon, which descended earthward with, and this is a quote from the original witnesses, fearful rapidity, sending both he and his faithful yet ill-fated co-pilot to their untimely deaths. No, it wasn't pretty. When the balloon hit the ground, they were, as one observer somewhat indelicately described it, dashed to pieces on a housetop. That didn't work out too well for him and his co-pilot. On the other hand, Grand Prix celebrated with his gutsy, though not particularly hard-fought, victory by sending the hot air balloon soaring even higher into the clouds before returning safely to Earth with his trusty co-pilot, presumably to claim his prize, the lovely Mademoiselle Trevette. So there you go. Don't just have any. If you're going to have a duel, really have a spectacular one, not just ordinary, commonplace.
That needs to be an opera. I would go see that. And
maybe Madame Trevette could act it out, in fact.
And then she runs off with someone else.
Right, that's right. Runs off with the co-pilot.
The co-pilot.
Well, now the whole idea of ballooning and the military we mentioned earlier came to the United States during the Civil War. And in fact, President Lincoln utilized balloons in the Union effort in the Civil War, and it all became because of a demonstration by a fellow named Thaddeus Lowe in July 1861. By the way, this comes to us from airandspace.science.edu. Thaddeus Lowe offered a demonstration to President Lincoln and Union Army generals concerning the potential of using hot air balloons for military observation. Lincoln was so impressed with the demonstration that he appointed Lowe as chief aeronaut of the Union Army Balloon Corps. That probably had to think of a name for that, in 1861. Chief aeronaut.
That's a title.
That is
absolutely.
Right.
Good
On
title.
June 1st, 1862, Lowe floated above a fierce Civil War battle with a silk hydrogen balloon. From the wicker basket dangling 1,000 feet above ground, he telegraphed a message to Northern generals on the ground. Union troops were finally driving back the Confederate forces. Lowe's message was translated to the War Department in Washington, where President Abraham Lincoln read his flying spy's good news with relief. In fact, for 2 years during the Civil War, a corps of balloonists led by Thaddeus Lowe spied on the Confederate Army. They counted rebel soldiers, detected troop movements, and directed artillery fire against enemy positions. Lowe and his aeronauts provided valuable intelligence to the Union Army, even after the balloons became targets of Confederate shooters and saboteurs. I would think they would catch on to that. Let's shoot that big thing up there. They're telling them where we are. Though his work was generally successful, it was not fully appreciated by all members of the military. This strikes of jealousy to me. And disputes over his operation and his pay scale forced him to resign in 1863. He returned to civilian life. By the way, he's also credited with inventing one of the first ice machines. And there's a mountain named for him, Mount Lowe, out in California. I believe there's an observatory on Mount Lowe. That is also named for him. So there you go. Civil War use of hot air balloons.
And they finally figured out, hey, let's shoot that thing down.
I know. I think that was sort of the undoing. Now, it might surprise some people to know that there were balloons actually used during World War II. And in fact, the only deaths in the continental United States to the hands of the Japanese occurred because of what they were calling fire balloons. The Japanese, between November 1944 and April 1945, the Japanese military launched more than 9,000 pilotless fire balloons. They were balloons with bombs attached to them.
Oh, wow.
The Japanese had figured out that up in the 30,000-foot stratosphere, there was a current. They called it a river in the sky. We call it the jet stream today, that could actually take hydrogen-filled balloons from Japan all the way to North America in 3 to 4 days. And so they launched about 9,000 of these balloons. They were just put them up there in the jet stream and let them go. The Japanese had a name for this. It was called Operation Fugo. Most of the balloons fell harmlessly into the Pacific Ocean, but at least 300 of them made it all the way to the United States, over 5,000 miles, and they were spotted fluttering in skies over the western U.S. and Canada. all the way from Holy Cross, Alaska to Nogales, Arizona, even as far east as Grand Rapids, Michigan. In March 1945, one balloon even hit a high-tension line and caused a temporary blackout at, of all places, the Hanford, Washington plant that was producing plutonium that would be used in the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki 5 months later. None of the balloons, however, had caused any injuries until May 5th, 1945. Reverend Archie Mitchell, in the spring of 1945, for him, that was a season of change. Not only were the minister and his wife, Elsie, expecting their first child, but he had also accepted a new post as a pastor at the Christian and Missionary Alliance Church in the sleepy little logging town of Bly, Oregon. Seeking to deepen their newly planted roots, the Mitchells invited 5 children from their Sunday school class, all between the ages of 11 and 14, onto a picnic amid the bubbling brooks and ponderosa pines of nearby Gerhardt Mountain on the beautiful spring day of May 5th, 1945. After lumbering up a one-lane gravel road, Mitchell parked his sedan and began to unload picnic baskets and fishing rods as Elsie, who was 5 months pregnant, and the children explored a knoll sloping down to the nearby creek. When 13-year-old Joan Patchke spied a strange white canvas on the forest floor, the curious girls summoned up the rest of the group. "Look what we found," Elsie called to her husband back in the car. "It looks like some kind of a balloon." The pastor glanced over at the group gathered in a tight circle around the oddity about 50 yards away. As one of the children reached down to touch it, the minister began to shout a warning, but he never had a chance to finish.
Oh, wow.
A huge explosion rocked the placid mountain. Elsie, the unborn baby, and all 5 of the children were killed almost instantly by the blast. When a forest ranger in the vicinity came upon the scene, he found the victims radiating out like spokes around a smoldering crater, and the 26-year-old minister beating his wife's burning dress with his bare hands, trying to put out the fire. What the U.S. military investigators sent to the blast scene immediately knew, but didn't want anybody else to know, was that this strange contraption was a high-altitude balloon bomb launched by Japan to attack North America. Now, citing the need to prevent panic and to avoid giving the enemy location information that could allow them to hone their targeting, the U.S. military censored reports about the Japanese balloon bombs. Although many Bly locals knew the truth, they reluctantly followed the military directives and adopted a code of silence about the tragedy, as the media reported that the victims died in an explosion of undetermined origin. By the end of May 1945, however, the military decided that in the interest of public safety, to reveal the true cause of the explosion and to warn Americans to beware of any strange white balloons that they might encounter. Information divulged too late, though, for the victims there in Oregon. Ultimately, Fugo was a vast military failure. Few balloons reached their targets, and the jet stream winds are only powerful enough in the wintertime when snow and damp conditions in North American forests precluded the ignition of any fires. They were kind of hoping that they would start forest fires and divert attention, but that didn't really work out well. The only casualties they caused were the deaths of the 5 innocent children and a pregnant woman, the first and only fatalities in the continental United States due to enemy action in World War II. This incident, by the way, is well known in Japan, and it's now common for Japanese tourists visiting the United States to include a stop at this memorial plaque at Gerhardt Mountain to pay their respects. 75 years later, hundreds of potentially dangerous balloon bombs may still lurk in remote, rugged locations of the West. In fact, in October 2014, a pair of loggers in British Columbia found the remnants of a balloon bomb that they destroyed in a controlled explosion before it could result in a repeat of that tragic day in 1945. So, interesting, these bombs could still be out there. Buried in the ground, buried in the forest at various places around the West.
Wow. I had no idea about that story.
I have been to a town called Lakeview, Oregon, which is very near where this happened, and it was still very much on the minds of the people who were living there, for sure.
So if you find something strange in the woods, don't poke it with a stick.
Exactly. It could still be a leftover balloon bomb from 1945.
And in spite of all of these stories, all of these horrible, tragic
Right.
balloon stories, we are not against balloons. I think we have one really happy story, right?
That's right. We can't end on such a sad note as that. We have a great story that comes to us out of the United Kingdom that is about really quite an amazing coincidence occurring.
Or a series of
coincidences involving a balloon. So let's get right to that. In 2001, a 10-year-old girl named Laura Buxton, she released a Mylar balloon from Staffordshire, England. The balloon had been a decoration at her grandparents' 50th anniversary celebration. At her grandfather's suggestion, Laura attached her name and address to the balloon in hopes that whoever finds the balloon would write to her and they could become pen pals. The balloon drifted for several days and 140 miles before finally coming to rest in the town of Milton Lilliborn near Marlborough Hard and in the yard of, guess what? Another 10-year-old girl who was also named Laura Buxton.
That's crazy.
That is crazy.
That's crazy.
So Laura Buxton released a balloon. It flew 140 miles and landed in the yard of another girl named Laura Buxton.
Same age.
Same age. That was the start of a discovery of a series of coincidences involving the two girls who lived a 3-hour drive away from each other and are not related. Laura number 2, who went to Kingsbury Hill School in Marlborough, obeyed the instructions on the balloon tag, which said, "Please write to Laura Buxton." Laura Buxton number 2 in Lilbourne, Wiltshire, wrote to Laura Buxton number 1 in Stoke-on-Trent, Staffordshire, to inform her that her balloon had been found and to report the unusual coincidence that it had ended up in the hands of someone with the very same name. The two girls got in touch by telephone, and the coincidence was amusing and harmless enough that the girls' parents arranged for them to meet face-to-face, whereupon they discovered a number of other similarities beyond the two girls sharing the same name. The Lauras were the same height, exactly. They had the same build, the same eye color. They looked very similar. They were both fair-haired. They both wore jeans with pink jumpers to their initial meeting. They both had gray rabbits, guinea pigs, and they both had a 3-year-old black Labrador as pets. Both girls brought their guinea pigs, which were the same color, with similar markings to their initial meeting. Pretty amazing, isn't it? In 2010, when the girls were in college, the first Laura's mother stated in an interview, "Laura Buxton that released the balloon is my daughter, and she's now 19 years old. The girls are still very good friends. They meet up as often and when time and commitments allow them. In fact, they are meeting again before they both go back to university." And the mother states, "We have no idea why this happened, but it did, and out of it has come a wonderful friendship."
That sounds like an episode of The Twilight Zone.
Yeah, it's really pretty funny. Laura Buxton releases a balloon. It travels 140 miles, and another girl with the exact same name, same age, very, very similar looking, finds the balloon.
That's amazing. Okay,
that's a nice story to end on.
That is a very nice story to end on. So now that we have ended, it is time for the trivia challenge.
Dun, 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 dun.
Number 1, like and follow our Facebook page at Remnant and Stew Podcast. Number 2, like and share this episode post. 3, put your answer to the trivia challenge question in the comments of that post. And the first person to do that will
What are they going to do? What's going to happen?
They will be the winner.
Woohoo! We love winners.
And will receive accolades.
And who can beat that?
This one's pretty easy. You could easily Google it. What balloon-related event that actually turned out to be a hoax had everyone glued to their TV sets in October of 2009?
Oh, that's such a good question.
So again, put that in. If you know the answer, put that in the comment section of this balloon episode post on our Facebook page.
Very good. Very good. Well, and also before you go, please hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any new stew. Maybe take a time to give us a review on iTunes. Oh, we love those reviews, don't we? Share us with your friends, your family, your tax assessor, your healthcare professional. And remember, whatever you do, wherever you go, and whomever you meet, choose to be kind.
And always stay curious. Until next time.